Afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the AV Experience. We are Jonathan-less tonight as we worry that he's going to cut off a hand during a freak table saw accident. He is with family, though. So if something happens, he will have a quick trip, hopefully, to the hospital because he is being monitored as we speak. But he said when he was ditching us that he was going to be ditching us to work on these subwoofers. So at least it's for something positive, unlike maybe working with family or something. Audio over everything else. I'm kidding, of course, but we are Jonathan-less tonight, so hopefully we can make the best of it, and hopefully he comes back unharmed. I will ask him, as I always do at the beginning of every stream, Jonathan, do you have both of your hands?
And all of your fingers.
So far, he has. So far, it's been a positive experience for him. I hope it continues. I'm anxious to see what those new UM18-2s do. What happened with the countdown, Bruce? Well, as soon as I started it, I realized this is going to be very bad for somebody watching this in VOD because then they have to sit through a 10-minute video and it just doesn't make sense. So while it's cool, it's also not cool for somebody watching the video back. So that's why I stopped the stream real quick and waited on Bob instead of letting it count down because most people aren't going to want to sit through a 10-minute countdown timer. But Bob, how have you been?
I've been great. It's been a really nice week. My wife and I got out a couple times. We did 3 escape rooms this week. I got to ride basically every day except for today. I took advantage of those last couple above 40-degree days.
Good.
Had an awesome time.
Good. Did I do anything constructive like you did? I don't think so. I just worked. I didn't do anything constructive. I watched Riddick. Both of them, Chronicles and Dark Fury.
Dark Fury, yep.
Did I do anything else? Did you do anything in the AV space?
I did. I got off that stream last week, and I realized that I have more decode channels at the moment than I had previously. So I added wide speakers.
You can see them in the background of Bob's screen.
You can see them. They are at a conveniently placed height, which is the height of a bar stool plus 2 pieces of half-inch MDF. Plus a Festool toolbox, which brought them exactly in line between the tweeter height of my fronts and my sides.
And to be clear, that is a temporary setup. Bob is not using these as a permanent deployment. What did you think? You and I talked about them briefly before we got into this, about kind of what you thought and how you were using them and what the outcomes were. But what did you think? How did it go? Take us through it.
Do you want to do movie first or wides first?
We're on the topic of wides, so let's go through the wides first.
So I was kind of curious. I mean, like, I'd never really had them in the space before. You see people pushing wides pretty heavily just as an object or as a space. So, I tried not to go into it with any preconceived notions. I know from just experience in my space that I have a slight hitch kind of right where that wide speaker is on that side. In the 3D sound field. So if you watch any of the Atmos demos, like a maze where the bird does the circular path around, I have a small little hitch where it feels like the soundstage jogs in a little bit. The wides took that out. So I had kind of perfect panning.
Now, when you say jogs in, you mean that the soundstage kind of collapses onto the LCR?
Yes. Yeah. Well, not even onto the LCR. It's in that side. Like you don't feel like the spaciousness all the way around you. It feels like as it transitions from side to front, it kind of comes in towards you a little bit. So I lose that sense of spaciousness right there. I don't lose it on the other side. And my room is not symmetrical at the moment. I'm slightly offset.
Okay.
So that it might be part of that reason. But it did kind of clean that up a little bit. The impact was very subtle, depending upon how you used it. And I watched some movies with wides on. I spent a lot of time because I'm using the Trinov at the moment. The Trinov has a couple of really nice visualization tools, both a multi-channel or an all-channel meter to show you what's actually being played to the channels, and an Atmos object visualizer, which is super cool. And what that one does is it shows you kind of a 3-dimensional view of your room with the speakers in it at their relative placements. And then you get the individual channels, and then you can show which channels are being excited at the moment and you get these yellow Atmos objects that will float around the room if they're being moved or depending upon their location in space. And you can kind of see what the Atmos track is doing. And that was really neat to check out. But as I started listening to Atmos music, it gave me a couple different ways that tracks were working. So, and then as you went back and forth between a 6-3-4 and an 8-3-4, which is what I have right now, you could hear sometimes differences and sometimes not differences. The kind of,
but I mean, that kind of goes back to how a lot of content is. If the content's not
exactly
encoded in a way that it's going to be able to take advantage of the wides, it's not really going to do a whole lot. And it also depends on object versus non-object, how the object is anchored to a certain position, and a bunch of other stuff. So there's a lot of variables in this. I will say that if, like, when you get into the Dolby demos and content that is designed to use these channels, it makes a big difference. But that is not nearly as common as people may think it is. Now, before we go into anything else, Bob, can you turn your camera so that people can see where the wides are? We're kind of zoomed in now, and it's going to, if you turn your camera just a little bit, it's going to, I think, give people a better idea of where. There you go. So you can, how many feet are they away from your mains?
So from me, well, let me.
Oh, you're going to measure.
For my main listening position, it's 2.5 meters to the wide. And to the main, so it's my wides are a meter closer to the main listening position than the fronts.
And I'm looking for a Dolby suggested,
but the angles are about right. I put them in between the first two the main speakers first reflection points on the wall. So I just happen to have acoustic panels there.
So let's look at like a 9 point. This isn't. Well, it's not even wides, is it? Yeah, it is. Okay, so if we take a look at this, I'm just going to give people an idea of what the implementation is that we're actually talking about. So let's pull it over there.
See if I can turn this further. And I'm going to turn the light on.
Is this going to give me... Don't... Sorry, guys, I'm trying to give it a... There we go. So we're going to allow this. So this is the Dolby suggested layout for what Bob is doing. I can't really zoom in any more than that, but this is a 9.1.4. So you got your sub, you got your LCRs, you got your surrounds, your rear surrounds, and you got your wides. So this is where it's saying or suggesting to put them. So angle wise, I think you're pretty close to that. You may be a little shallow. But
on the wide, I could maybe bring it a little, but I'm easily within that distance.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to give people an idea of where the speaker is that he's talking about, it's this one and this one, these front wides.
Yeah.
And a lot of setups don't have these. Most setups are going to be 5 channels. So you're going to have your LCRs and your surrounds. A lot of times in a 5-channel surround, these will typically move a little bit further back. And people more often, if they do 7 channels, would do your LCRs, your surrounds, and then rear surrounds instead of doing these wides. A lot of times wides can get in the way of walkways. They'll get in the way of doorways. They'll get in the way of a lot of different things. So these 4 are more common for surrounds over wides. And this isn't something that Bob has had before. So he's been experimenting with them since he's got a Trinov in there to play with currently. And the Trinov has the object viewer that I can bring up. We're not going to be able to see what it's doing, but let me bring it up. Let me stop sharing here real quick. Bob, you can pan back to you. Let me pull up the object viewer so people can see what we're talking about. Okay. And I'm going to try and stay on top of your guys' questions. With Jonathan here and myself here, it's a little bit easier to stay on top of them. I haven't seen too many questions come in. I've got one. Somebody asked where Jonathan was. Jonathan cut his hands off. No, he didn't. Jonathan's fine. He's just with family. So let me... Oh, the turn-off is powered off, so that's why it won't turn on. So we're not going to look at the optimizer. Are you able to bring up the optimizer and share your screen, Bob? Is the turn-off on for you? Mine's powered off, and then I got to go find the Control 4 remote to get it to power on.
Let me check to see if it is right now. If not, I can go easily do that real quick.
Now, we talked about this just a minute ago, and I do want to bring this back up, that the wides, though they are very cool, and when content is designed to be able to utilize them, they are super cool. A lot of content is not designed to be able to utilize them, and very much like running more tops or heights and stuff, people have this overzealous idea that they're going to get used more than they actually do. And I think a lot of the use case is potentially psychological, where you're like, okay, I'm not missing anything because I got front wides. It's not necessarily that they're being utilized, though they will if objects are getting passed around through the base layer and moving from that position up to the tops and other things. Since they're not getting used as much as people actually think they are, I think a lot of the use case is more psychological than it is actual being in use by an object or non-object panning through them. Yeah, Miles, rip hands. I'm going to continue to give Jonathan crap about that and trying to cut those sheets, those 4x8 sheets on a table saw. I mean, Bob, we've both been there. You and I have both been there cutting 4x8 sheets on a table saw. It's not like he's doing anything that any of us haven't done before. It's just there are better ways to accomplish this.
I missed most of that because I was turning the turn-off on.
It's all right. I didn't want to talk to you anyway.
All right.
So turn-off's powering on. We're just going to show you the object viewer. And are you able to play something, even if it's muted, and see it moving through?
I'd have to turn the projector on.
Can you do that?
I suppose I can. Well, I'm going to get another remote. Hold on a second, I'll get a remote.
I am starring your guys' questions. Austin Smith asks, if content is not designed to use them, do they not get used, or is there a negative effect? I assume there isn't a negative, thus having them is better for the content, which can take advantage. To my understanding, there isn't a negative effect like there is with potentially 6 tops versus 4 tops. But Bob noted when he was taking them in and out of content or in use for the base layer, the sound field, the object that was anchored, if it's anchored to a wide channel, if there isn't a wide present, gets moved to the left or right front. So you lose that width in the sound stage if a wide is actually being utilized, and it moves to being anchored with the left or right instead of it being stereo imaged to the position where it would be otherwise.
Only in certain types of sound fields, though.
Yes, yeah. If it's anchored, I think you said specifically, and we would need to go talk to an Atmos audio engineer that's actually encoding this stuff to be sure. But if it's anchored to that position, like to that speaker, from your testing is, I think, what you came to find out.
I'm booting up Amazon Music right now.
Willie Aris says, when I first installed my front wides, I thought my first test sounded excellent until I put my ears up to them and realized no sound was being fed to them.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is that a lot of you can throw such a great stereo image between your side and your front that you really don't notice that they're always that they're on or not.
Well, and this is a great point of the psychological effect that we as humans can create. This happens in a bunch of different situations, primarily through a psychological effect called priming, where you're primed to, before you experience something, to believe or encounter a certain outcome. So priming can happen from all different types of stimuli. It can happen from the environment, smells, visual things in your visual field. It can happen from previous conversations, previous experiences, your own type of expectations. I mean, anything you're taking into something like that is priming you to believe that a certain outcome is going to be reached. And it is potentially going to increase the propensity in that outcome is going to either actually come true, which isn't influenced at all by priming, or you believe that outcome has come true through your psychological, how can I put that? Psychological belief or understanding, which is a big reason why if demos are not done properly and you don't account for all of these variables, you can very easily come to a false conclusion and really go down a pretty adverse pathway that is you're just going to encounter and come to conclusions that have no basis on the objectivity that was actually there, but because of priming and the psychological effect, you just weren't able to see or experience. That was very muddy in how I explained that, but hopefully you guys understood.
Ooh, I might have made a mistake.
What does that mean?
I'm looking at the rooms I had set up in Trinov with the way the wide object moved, and my room dimension did not carry over from one setup to the other. So it's building my room of a different length than the other. So that might account to why that wide object moved.
What a failure.
Yeah, but I can show you what it looks like because it looks really cool.
What a failure. Yeah, let's look at that. I think before going into any more conclusions, and these are conclusions that we've reached through testing. This doesn't mean that these conclusions are right or wrong. It's just this is what we've experienced so far. I want to be wrong because if I'm not wrong, then I'm not learning. I really, really, really want to be wrong, at least in some capacity, as often as I can. Not intentionally, but if I'm not wrong, then it means I'm not learning. And I think it's really important that we all continue to learn and we all value and understand that there's a lot that we don't know. So just understand that what we've come to, these conclusions, does not mean that this is factually one way or the other. It's just this is what we've observed so far.
How do I share my screen here?
Oh, you hit the H. You got it. H. Did you get it?
Yeah. Is
that
working? Okay.
Go on stream. There you go.
All right. So here is what it looks like with the room layout that I have with wides enabled.
Mm-hmm.
And when you play, you get this kind of cool object where it gives you a nice view of the room itself. Yeah, let me zoom in.
What demo is this? Or is this music?
This is a boom.
Okay.
And so this one does use objects on a fairly aggressive path for certain things. But certain things that you don't expect are not actually encoded as objects. So this is a track that most people have probably heard multiple times. The big one that was surprising for me in the way they actually encoded this track is that pan where the boom swirls up and then back down is not an object pan. It's actually a pan through bed layer speakers, which was kind of interesting. But if you notice the way the objects kind of go around and, you know, we'll approach speakers and things like that, for some reason the green's not activating right now.
What's the green?
That is the bass meter.
Yes, there you go.
No, meters should be on, but they're not flashing. I don't know why.
Well, that's okay.
Anyway, normally when you run this, an individual channel as it's being played will flash and show you that the channel is being played. But it is not doing that. Why I'm on the wrong page. That's why. There's another one that you have to log on to that has the setup options, and I'm not on that one. So I have the wrong bookmark on this one. But anyway, that's what it would look like, except that the green channels will flash.
Mm-hmm.
So it
what
shows
we're
you
seeing right now is just the objects.
That is just the objects. The bed channels would be flashing normally. But going through a bunch of music, I've kind of seen them encoded in 3 different ways. They'll either not use objects at all, and the content's only played through bed channels, which happens quite a bit of stuff. Kind of the more classic things. So like Pink Floyd on Dark Side of the Moon, they don't use any objects. It's all bed layer speakers. And then you'll get some stuff where they will use stationary objects. So they'll bind an object to the space where the wide would be, and they will excite that object as another channel of separation. So it doesn't that object, but the objects don't move in that location. And then you get the ones like this where there's objects moving all around. Let me see if I can find one that's stationary. I think Guns N' Roses is stationary. Yeah. So right there, the objects are stationary in the space, and they don't wind up moving as the track plays. That's a 6.4. So let me turn 8 on. That's why the Atmos object wasn't showing up. But there's on 8. So if you see right here, this one right here is the wide speaker. And so that object basically just sits on top of that wide speaker all the time. And that's how it excites the object, or that the speaker. So, but they don't move in the sound space. So it's just a few extra channels of placement. And then you'll get a good number of layouts like this. And I don't know if it's because I did the dimensions of this room wrong the second time, or if it's the way that they are moved when you switch channel counts. I will be testing that after this because I evidently made a mistake in this configuration. But with the way this one's set up right now, when you disable that wide, it moves that back to bind into a speaker. So that wide speaker disappears and that object moves to the front, which kind of causes a dramatic difference in the soundstage. But I don't know if that's because my room's set up wrong on this one, or if that's the way it actually turns out. So I'll find out probably tonight or tomorrow.
How do I hide? There we go. I just think it's interesting to see how different engineers and studios encode different pieces of content. Like, it is super different in how they do things. Everybody has a different idea on what they think is ideal and correct and the best way to do things and not. And everything is so different from one another. It always does seem, though, that the tracks that I like the most are moving a bit more than being static as far as Apple Music goes. Like, I really like Billie Eilish. Boom's super cool. A lot of the static ones just feel like they've almost created kind of an all-channel stereo sort of thing, or they bind an instrument to one specific location, and it doesn't how they've done it, and a lot of times doesn't seem natural. It doesn't work well within the medium, but for certain artists, it's very, very well done.
Yeah, there's some recording artists that do a really good job, and certain mixing artists that do a really good job. I really like the Steven Wilson stuff in Atmos, but there's some, more classic artists that you have Atmos mixes out there that just don't sound right. It's kind of this, I don't know if it's done via AI or if it's just done via some standard mixing algorithm. They'll tend to throw one track to each speaker and just spread the band out around you, and it sounds wrong. Rolling Stones is like that. There's a couple Atmos mixes of the Stones, and they're not great. Things are not where they're supposed to be. Yeah. But for the stuff that's mixed specifically for Atmos, it's a lot of fun to listen to.
It is. And it can be super cool and immersive if done correctly. But there is a lot of hot garbage out there. A lot of hot garbage. And I think there's so much hot garbage because it's my understanding that Apple actually pays more for Atmos mixes than they do for 2-channel. Like, they'll pay royalties more for something that's Atmos than they will for a 2-channel mix. Somebody asked a question on this topic. Oops, sorry, says, let's unstar that because I'm asking it. 9.6 seems to be much better setup for immersiveness, but people need doors in rooms. So will they ever do better with 9.6 content? I think most content's actually less than that. 7.
7.2.
or 5, depending on the studio.
I think they're all mastered in 7.2, isn't it? As
Honestly,
far
I'm
as
not
bed channels, I
knowledgeable
think
enough to be able
it's
to tell you.
7.2 are the number of bed channels that are active in residential distribution.
I don't know the answer to that. The hardest thing with this is, as you say, Upsari, is door location. I have found that the ideal door location in a lot of theaters is if you look at your room from a top down, and let's say the room is a rectangle, and you have the ability to run 11 channels, the door location, the best that I have found, is between, you've got your LCR up front, then you've got your front wide, then you've got your surround, then you've got your rear wide, and then your rear. The best door location is between the front wide and the surround, because it's out of the way, it's out of your sight line. It creates an open walking path that's not walking directly into the couch or anything else. It's in front of the couch, which typically has more space available than behind it. And it's just, there's really not another great position to do it, because if you put it in the back, you're screwing a lot more with acoustics. If you do it on the side, a lot of times you can mimic the door position on the other side of the room. Like if you've got a portal or some kind of cutout, you can mimic that. So if you're dealing with acoustics, you can try and mimic that and get symmetry as much as possible. But that's what I found for an ideal door location, though for a lot of rooms that can be very difficult to do, because it's not really ideal for how most rooms are laid out and how you enter them from the rest of the home.
I think I might wind up with the middle of the back wall door when I move stuff in between the rear subs.
There's worse positions, like in the middle of the front wall.
I'm just not sure I'm gonna have enough space between like the side wall and where the side subs need to be. I might have to go underneath the projector, and I'm gonna find out when I try to move stuff around. But it'll be interesting, because the side location where you had specified right there, that's the hallway I already have right there.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it because it's all painted black, so it's kind of hard to see. That light switch is where it's at. That goes to a bathroom and equipment closet in my wood shop, so I can't go in that way.
So Kevin asks, when you say objects are used for music, I have to think that one object is one instrument. Is that how they do it? Always static, placed around your room?
No, so the objects move a lot. And so, well, the objects can either be, it depends on how the recording engineer did it. Because if they're stationary objects, I think they're going to, and my wife has recording software upstairs. I'm going to try to play around with it this week to find out how you can actually encode that stuff. But if it's a stationary object, and you want to move that piece of thing in the sound field, you're going to have to move it through different channels. So you have to pan it around through bed layer channels, through a stationary object. Otherwise, you have to move the object in 3D space. And there's different ways to do both. So when you listen to normal stereo and you have a pan, that pan, the object, the track that you're listening to moves through like a left, the center, the right, the side, rear, or the rear, and moves through those individual channels. You can also encode it as an object, and that object can move.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I have found, and what we pointed out with the last track that you showed on the object viewer, is that a lot of what I think more garbage content, it's not all of it, but it binds in the object to a location, and then that object doesn't move. Think of it like, and I kind of get what they're trying to do. They're kind of trying to set the stage for, this is where the guitarist is, and this is where the vocalist is, and we're going to bind the bassist back behind you for some reason, and we're going to do this. So now the bassist is behind you, and all of the bass content is coming from your rear right or something like that. It's just super weird. To me, that's not what this content or this medium should be used for. It should be used in an artistic manner and not trying to create, at least in music, a realistic field. You should be able to utilize it in a way that increases immersion.
There was some a multi-channel demo that I listened to at Expona the last year or second to last year. They were at the old location by the airport, and it was set up as either a 5 or a 7 channel bed layer system. I can't remember. It might have even been JTR that did this room, but they were playing these multi-channel audio mixes, and they had set this particular mix, the microphone they were miking in the middle of like a string quartet. And so it was like you were standing in the middle of a group of performers, which is a way you would never experience music like that. So it was an odd experience. You got a lot of separation between individual instruments. Things were coming out of different corners, but it didn't sound right. And that's kind of the issue with some of these Atmos tracks, where they take what would have been like an established stage band. You know, you go watch like the Rolling Stones, for example, and it's a band. I mean, you watch them on stage, you see the content, that's how they're set up like that. But when you throw, you know, the bass to one speaker, when you split a drum kit out, and so like part of the drum kit's on one side, part of the drum kit's on the other, it sounds unnatural. But the more modern, and, you know, I don't want to call it pop, but the synths heavy stuff, or the things that have more complex spatial objects in them, they lend themselves very well to this, so that you can move those things around in the sound field to create really neat immersive effects that don't detract from the way the music is set up, because it's not, you know, a guitarist and a band player and a drum kit and a singer. It's different sounds, and they work really well like that. And they're a lot of fun to listen to.
I think people and artists and engineers need to understand that not every piece of content needs to be mastered this way.
I was clicking through the Amazon Music library. I think it was Amazon Music. And I found Morphine in Atmos. And Morphine is 3 people. It's a guy playing a 2-string slide bass, a saxophone player, and a drummer.
And how did they do this?
Stuff was not where it was supposed to be. Like the drum kit was like spread out into the wides. It just sounded wrong.
So for people that want to give this a listen, Atmos Music is on
Amazon Music, Tidal, and Apple Music.
And Apple Music. So my favorite artist strangely, for Apple Music or for Atmos tracks is Billie Eilish. I feel like her sound engineer just does amazing stuff. And it's not
Taylor Swift's engineer.
Taylor Swift also does a very good job. And what I found is that they're doing things in a not in your face way. It's all very subtle. They made most of the stuff, the soundstage is still in the front, and they're just moving something that may have some immersion characteristic behind you, or move it around the room, and then you come back to the front. It just adds that little bit to suck you into the content. And that's what a really good mix is. It's not over the top. Geigerzoller is one of those that is over the top, and there's just stuff everywhere, which is super cool, but it can be very difficult and kind of distracting to focus on things. Billie Eilish, some of her even most intimate tracks use Atmos, and they do it in such a phenomenal way. I encourage everybody to listen to it. May not be your favorite genre, she may not be your favorite artist, but her engineer and whoever's doing that and coming up with it is doing a fantastic job. And that's how I think more people should do that. And the Who,
the HU, yes, the HU in Atmos utilizes the Atmos tracks for some from spacious standpoint. So it adds some ambiance and kind of spreads a little bit of the sound field around, but it's not throwing just things everywhere. And they're really neat to listen to.
They are.
It changes the sound profile though, because it pulls a lot of that sound energy out of the front and moves it into different speakers.
That's the one thing that I wish didn't happen on the Who, but I can appreciate that they moved it. They were moving stuff around, and they did it in a very tasteful way. I think with Atmos, at least with Atmos Music, a lot of times, just like we say with EQ and really everything in life, a lot of things in life, in my opinion, less is more. And the less you do, but the more tastefully you do it and optimally timed, the better the overall experience is going to be. Should we talk about the movies now?
We can talk about the movies.
Okay. So, chat, did you watch them with us? Chronicles of Riddick.
And Dark Fury. Well,
and Dark Fury.
Dark Fury is first.
Dark Fury was first. Now, Dark Fury is SD, standard definition. The Mad VR Experience Center is actually not capable of watching S standard definition. It's
capable. You
because
just
of
don't have the
EDIDs.
EDID coded.
It's because of EDIDs. It's not because the room is elitist or something like that. It has nothing to do with that. It's just that the EDIDs are not set up currently to be able to handle standard definition. So it gets it, and I just get no signal. I get audio, but the matrix doesn't know what to do with it, so I get a black screen. So Bob graciously lent me his copy, and I played it on disc, and I was not a fan of Dark Fury.
And this is going to kind of date certain people out here. If you were of the age of watching MTV when MTV was going through expanding from shows or from just music to shows, MTV ran a show called Aeon Flux, which is some people have seen it, some people hasn't. And I didn't really like Aeon Flux, but Aeon Flux was done by Peter Chang, which is the same guy who did Dark Fury. So the animation style is remarkably similar. And so if you liked that style of animation, it was a good movie for you because it was very much the same. If you didn't, then, it was kind of a filler episode.
Yeah, it just didn't age well. The story kind of sucked. I don't know. It did fill it to make sense to what was going on. Like the priest and Jack, you understood like where they went and how all of that, where that time went, and then how they went to the location they did. It was just, I didn't like it.
It introduced Toombs, which was kind of nice.
Yeah, that's true.
So you got his introduction. You got a couple of kind of cool Riddick fights. I did like the closing credits song. I thought was a neat 5-1 mix.
Mm-hmm.
And the audio track for a 5-1 track was really good. I mean, I thought the audio was better than the visual.
The audio was absolutely better than the visual because the visual was really bad. And maybe it wasn't that bad. I just didn't care for the animation taste. Like the animation style, I didn't like. I've watched a lot of anime. Like
it's a polarizing style.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not for me. I mean,
no.
I
that
appreciate
content
it,
needed to be 60p. It needed to be 60p and not 24.
Well, not in 2004, whenever that was made.
Yeah, it needed smooth. Like it was just, I didn't like it. The music was great. Story was kind of funky. Explain some stuff if we're taking this as canon. Is it considered canon?
Possibly.
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Enough about that. Yeah. Chronicles.
Love that movie.
What did you think about the very beginning when Jack is in the cage? They put her in the cage.
Before we do this, first off, did you watch the theatrical release or the director's cut? Okay, I watched the director's cut also, and I'd never seen it before. This was the first time I'd watched it.
Okay, I've seen it before. When they're in the cage, or they're putting Jack in the cage, there's a monster hand that comes out. Do you remember seeing that?
Mm-hmm.
It looked really fake. Do you remember?
I watched it on DVD, so I watched it in 480. Okay. I don't have it in HD.
It all blurred together. I only had 4 pixels. One was green, one was yellow, one was blue, and one was brown.
I was really pleasantly surprised at how good that movie looked upscaled from a DVD.
I thought it looked pretty good. I thought Pitch Black was better. Pitch Black, I felt like over the time since the content has come out, I felt like Pitch Black stood up better than Chronicles. I felt like.
So I like Chronicles better because Chronicles is more of a sci-fi movie and Pitch Black is more of like a space-ish horror movie.
Yeah.
Pitch Black is honestly not that much different from like Predator.
No.
Or Alien, or any of those other, monster
not
movies
at all.
in a location, or The Thing. So I mean, it's that kind of same genre, and it's an enjoyable movie. But I like the way that the characters kind of got flushed out a little bit more in Chronicles. I liked the worlds. I liked the pseudo technology. I thought it's a fun movie, and it was the first time I'd ever seen the director's cut. And when you watch the theatrical release, they remove all the Furion stuff. So like the glow on his chest, that little explosion outside the hangar, the woman talking to him in his dreams. I don't think any of that was in the theatrical
It helped
release.
make
All that
sense
got cut.
of things, didn't it?
It kind of gave him, because in the first one, everyone was basically just a human in space.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go watch the second one, and I think the director's cut worked better with the second one because now everyone has these kind of space magic superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got the necromongers who, well, however you want to, they're half undead, and then the emperor kind of like does the teleportation stuff around, and everyone there. You start getting into these things where people are more powerful than they should be, and it kind of gives a reason why Riddick is so amazing, because he's a different subspecies, or however I don't really know the way they classify the Furians, if they had some sort of base ability because of where they came from. You introduce the elementals, the elemental witches.
Mm-hmm.
So there was more magic and other powers involved in Chronicles, which kind of made it a little bit more interesting. Now, as the dark,
I enjoyed the movie.
Right.
Pitch Black held up better. Wasn't me saying that I didn't enjoy it. It was the CGI, I felt like, held up better in Pitch Black than it did, at least in the version I watched, in Chronicles. I enjoyed the story in Chronicles more.
Right. When I watched it at the 10-15 minutes at your place, watching the 1080 version, especially with Mad VR's motion AI turned on, like it got crazy crisp and crazy clear and looked really, really good. But I can see that having the same issue that you get with some of these other 4K remasters, is that it shows off.
It does
all the things that the lower resolution hides.
It does.
So the CGI looks worse. The prop effects look more obvious. And I didn't get that notion because I watched it on a DVD, and it looked really good.
Mm-hmm. It definitely highlights movies' shortcomings, and you can tell when movies are old when you watch them with things like Mad VR's motion interpolation turned on, because it removes the ability for things to hide behind the frame rate and to hide behind your persistence of vision and things that we as humans do with how we see, that cinematographers utilized in order to hide shortcomings that they can't really get around, especially at that time, because of limitations of technology and CGI and other stuff. So I took that, you go into that knowing that it's an older film, but I just think that Pitch Black held up better, in my opinion. Now we'll have to see what Riddick looks like when we go to it. Which story did you like better? Well, you liked Chronicles better.
I liked Chronicles better.
Yeah, I like Pitch Black better. It's that's my favorite. And maybe it'll be different when we watch Riddick, but definitely still my favorite after rewatching them years later.
I'm gonna have to get a copy of Riddick because I don't have it. I don't think anywhere. That one will probably at least be in 4K then.
What's newer?
I don't think Riddick came out on DVD.
I don't remember.
It probably is out on DVD. They all had old releases back then. That was 2013.
It's a lot newer than Chronicles.
No, I think Riddick was like 13 or something like that.
I know, but Chronic was like what, 2004?
Yeah, and they've got a new one coming out still, don't they? Is that actually in production?
I don't know. I just know I've heard about it. So that'll be interesting.
Riddick Furia.
Maybe it'll be animated in the visual style of Dark Fury. I hope not.
Let's see. When does it say it's coming out? Production began in early 2017. Okay. It was officially announced in February 2023. I don't see any sort of principal photography began August 23rd, 2024 in Germany, Spain, and UK. So I guess they're actively filming.
Hmm.
So that's nice.
Cool. I like the story. I like the universe that they're in. I like all of that. So
yeah,
I'm excited for that one. Hopefully it's Vin Diesel, and hopefully it's ends out well. I'm excited for it. So today's topic is I want people to think about. Are you turning stuff off?
My projector's still on. There we go.
Today's topic is, why are you telling me this? Seems kind of an odd one. You guys have heard me talk about this if you've watched this stream for some time. It's, why are you telling me this? And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I feel like as of recently, we're not going to talk about any specific instance or get into any too granular detail about any of these things, but there have been, this is always ongoing, but there's been some recent ones that really stand out where people are saying things, provide no contextual value or objective data, and want you to believe them. And I see all the time when I am looking at these videos and posts on forums and in Facebook and any type of social media, so many people just eating up what these people say. And I think that one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up now is because I'm currently going through Floyd Toole's book and reading all of that, rereading it. And there was a graph in there that actually talks about how accurate a lot of people are when they do listening tests.
Mm-hmm.
And the most accurate are typically like audio engineers that are part of on the equipment side that take it very analytically. And some of the least accurate people are content creators.
Yep. And enthusiasts, because they want to hear something.
And enthusiasts. So
untrained listeners actually kind of do a pretty decent job because they don't know what they're listening for.
They said untrained listeners after training. And they said you could train somebody in just a few hours and you could very reliably get information out of it. And I realize this is kind of funny that we're talking about this, and here I am as a content creator doing a stream about it. But I do want
people to did this at M-Wave.
I know, but I'm saying here in the context
of
a video, I know you did, but in a video that we're saying content creators suck at doing listening tests, and here we are telling people about speakers and all this other audio stuff and through a medium of content creation. But I think we kind of get around that because I tell people, and I will tell you time and time again, ask why we are telling you things. Evaluate and scrutinize and go do your own research. And when I'm telling customers this stuff and I'm saying, hey, I think you should do this, I want people to do it for their own reason, not because I told you so. I want you to go figure out, and I'll provide data and all of that so that you have things to look at. But I want people to be educated on why and how they're making these decisions instead of just trusting somebody blindly. And I felt it when I first read his book, and I feel it now when I'm reading it again, that it's amazing how many people I feel like go down these pathways of listening to people just because they're creating content about it, and how psychologically we think they've made content about it, so they must be a person of knowledge or a subject matter expert because they're talking about it. When in my opinion, I think, and you guys can think this about me, it kind of is. I mean, I'm talking about my opinion on the internet. The internet has just given people a platform to tell others their own opinions and provide their own levels of validity or not. So the topic today is really just, why are people telling you this?
I think from the opposite side of that, not the people telling you it, but from the consumer of the information side, that kind of falls into two things. I mean, one is there's a general lack of availability to experience things in person these days compared to how there was 20 years ago.
There is
25 years ago. I mean, just in Kansas City alone, there were multiple very nice high-end audio shops. I mean, not as that I'm saying that's a great example, but there were, if you wanted to go listen to different speakers, there were different places around town that actually had them in a store that you could walk in and listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And these days there are 2, 3. There's one downtown. There's like the Magnolia at Best Buy. There's one in Independence.
There's Dava.
And Dava. And that's, I think, about it in town.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've lost the ability to experience these things in person. And so when you read about it or see it, or it's on a Facebook feed or an AVS forum, and you hear about this new cool thing and you really want to experience it, you just search for it any way you can. And you try to consume all the content you can about it. And you've got to, either be very selective on who you hear and what you take out of it, or you can be biased pretty heavily by
I don't
the
think there's
opinions of certain
necessarily a
individuals.
problem with, taking in as much content as you can, because I think it's really important to get as much information as you can. But I also think it's really important to, again, ask yourself while you're taking in that content, why are they telling me this? Like, why are they telling me that I need this instead of just having that? Why are they telling me I need to have this attached to that in order to get a better overall experience? Is there some type of motive behind it? Are they telling me? And then answer that question, and then ask yourself that again based on that information. And it's going to be really, really revealing, I think, if you don't do this already, how much of it is a narcissistic reason that the person is telling you this. It's a self-beneficial reason that they're telling you this. And there's very few people that I can think of that don't do this. One of them, and I'm going to talk him up, is Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner. I don't think he takes any, that I'm aware of, he takes any sponsorships. I don't think. Does he do affiliate links?
Possibly. I don't know.
I don't
want to speak on that one.
But I mean, he'll freely tell you that don't buy based on what I tell you, buy based on the information that you gather. So he's one of the very few that I trust in that regard. Amir is another one that's in this. I think Amir at some point, I think, goes potentially too far down the data-driven pathway. But I think it's very important to have those objective side of it. Somebody said that sounds very much like the Harmon study. Here it is, boondoggle. That's because Floyd Toole worked on that Harmon study, if I remember correctly. So that's why it sounds familiar, because it's one of the same. He did a lot of those listening tests, and it's very, if you haven't read his book, it's been rewritten a couple times over the years. It's very, very informational, and it explains a lot about why we perceive things certain ways. It's just very enlightening about why the art of the demo happens. Well, let's talk about the art of the demo real quick. I bring it up every once in a while, but I think it's really important to talk about.
I've got a great story for the art of the demo.
Well, start with your story.
So when I was at Expona last year, last year. Well, I guess, yes, it is now last year.
I know the one you're going to talk about.
Yes, you do. So I was, because I went with Ryan to help set up the room that he was doing there. I was there all weekend, and it was the first time I'd been at the show, open to close, every single day. And I went to every single room at Expona, and I sat and listened to at least 2 tracks on every system.
You did. You would just disappear for several hours.
I was just gone all day long. I don't even think I ate lunch any day. I was just in rooms all day long. And I honestly had a blast doing it. I took tons of notes. I took lots of pictures. I can't count the number of people that thought I was media because I kept writing everything down. And they'd come over and ask what publication I was for. I'm like, nope, just writing notes. But there was this one room I went into, and it was they sold very expensive equipment. They actually had 2 or 3 rooms there, and one of the rooms their equipment wasn't hooked up in. It was just showcased. But they had this expensive power conditioner in there. and they heavily prepped you on what it was. They talked about how the people that researched it, they name dropped all constantly about where they did their research at, who was involved in the project, to give kind of a semblance of authority behind what they were presenting you. And they kind of went over what you'd expect to hear, which is another big thing. When someone tells you what you're going to hear in the demo, that's always a giant red flag. But they played this bit of content on the system with the nicest power cable that they made hooked up to the amplifier. And I think maybe the processor, I don't remember if they switched one or two cables, but they had their big giant power cable hooked up, and played it. And I was kind of watching everything they were doing, but they had the volume knob on the preamp set to a certain level. I mean, I will say it was, negative. It would say, I think that one went higher. I think it was like a 26 or something like that. Anyway, it was at some number. And they started it off. And as they played, the guy turned the volume up, and then turn the volume up a little bit more, and then turn the volume up a little bit more, until it got to a higher level towards the end of the track you were listening to. And when it got done, he stopped it for a little bit, talked again while he was going behind, unhooking this power conditioner that aligned the electrons and kept them aligned as they went through the rest of the system using some proprietary special magic material. And then hooked it back up with a lesser power cord. So it was like 2 or 3 steps down their line. So it wasn't nearly as good of a power cord. But they had the power conditioner built into it that was going to show us how good this thing really was. And he turns it back on from the beginning of the track, not where it left off, with the volume now at the higher level that it was when he ended, not where it was when he started. And the first things they started talking about was see how much more dynamic it was, how much more impactful it was. Here's all these additional things you hear. Well, I mean, it was 6-8 dB louder the second time they started the track. And then you've got the 3 people who are standing off to the side while they're running this demo that are all wearing their convention badges, kind of whispering to each other about, do you hear like the sound on this hi-hat or on this thing? And just making little kind of whispering comments to each other that are just loud enough for you to hear about all the detail that you should now be able to hear because it's louder.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stop it before they get back to the same part of the track. Now, I didn't go back and listen to it again, so I don't know if that's the same spiel they did every time, but that spiel that they did that time I was in the room was kind of that perfect example of conditioning your audience and changing a few things, not making an even comparison, that really bring out differences that are audible and noticeable because the volume has changed.
Mm-hmm. And we as people perceive a lot of times an SPL increase as an increase in clarity.
That louder is better. Yep.
So that reminds me, I've talked to Floyd Toole a couple times already. He made a comic that's in the beginning of his book that said at these audio shows, the only place that science and physics does not apply is in those listening rooms. Mm-hmm. They have their own level of science and physics that applies only in those spaces, because what they're trying to tell you, not all, but a lot of times,
very good presenters there that were very neutral. They were not trying to overly color you. There were other ones that really wanted to go down the path. Yes. But I mean, there was some stuff that was really enjoyable to listen to, just from an experience. I'm going to get sidetracked if I go down that route, so I'll stop there.
So Big Jack says these people should be named. I'm not here to start a flame war. Like, I'm not. Well, yes, maybe that would be better for the industry. I don't know. I'm not here to do that. I just want people to be aware themselves so that if they see these situations, they can realize it, and just walk away, move themselves out of it. So
the story enjoy the experience.
Yeah. The story that I'm going to say is I worked at Best Buy for a long time. Well, not a long time, a few years. And Best Buy was a big seller when I was there of Monster Cable. And Monster Cable would come around. I'm going to name drop this one because is Monster Cable even in business anymore, really? They're kind of on the dollar bin stuff now. But Monster Cable would do these cable comparisons. And in this particular comparison, it was a speaker cable comparison. And they had two setups, identical setups. One with the no-name oxygen-free copper that everybody would say is just fine. And then the other one was the Monster Cable. And they would turn these on, not changing anything, unlike in Bob's story. And you could plainly hear, if you were listening close enough, a difference. Much like, Bob, what you experienced in certain tracks with dynamic range at M-Wave. When, like, one example, when you were doing the
bandwidth stuff, the streaming bandwidth. Yeah.
So much like that, where the dynamic range seemed to compress and fall apart. What they didn't tell you or show you really was the cables themselves. Like, they gave you an example. They held up an example that wasn't actually connected. But what they didn't show you was the cables that were back behind actually connecting everything. So the Monster Cable was, I don't remember how long it was 15 feet or something like that. The normal oxygen-free copper, which was actually just oxygen-free copper, same gauge, was like 200 feet long, and it was coiled. So while they weren't outright lying, they were kind of lying through omission. And by kind of, I mean really lying through omission and not doing your apples to apples comparison. So the other part that gets people in trouble, which is what Bob was talking about at the very beginning of the demo for his story, is, and I talked about this at the very beginning of the priming, is people will, or demoers will prime their demoees with types of subconscious thoughts where they're going to say something and then you're going to remember that, or they're going to put things in a room that instill a certain feeling and you're going to go in and experience that. Maybe the one that they really like you to like is actually a cleaner setup than the other one that's a little bit messier. There's all different kinds of stuff now, or not now, but there's all different kinds of stuff then and now that can create a subconscious bias towards a specific product or experience. And it's most people, really all people, because it's virtually impossible to get around these priming effects in everyday life, experience these, and it's gonna prime you in some way, shape, or form. And this is why blind ABX, or even if all it's possible, blind AB testing is so important. Anybody that discounts it and says, oh, well, you're just, you're causing your own type of subconscious bias or straining yourself because of the blind AB testing, anybody that says that, just omit them, just throw them away. Because in the testing that has been done with this, it's actually been found that people that go through AB and ABX testing actually experience less stress to make a decision than people that do it on a cited comparison, because they aren't having to go through all of these subjective bias hula hoops and steps. They don't have to wonder, am I liking this because it looks better? Am I liking this for this reason? They just get to choose what they like best because of a very finite set of objective variables. And it leads you to, in virtually every situation, a much more objective end result than if you do something cited. And again, another prop to Floyd Toole's book. I feel like that's all I'm doing is talking about his book. All through chapter 1 through 4, this is all stuff that he talks about, which is very, very informative. And it actually provides data on how the end results changed based on a blind test compared to a cited test using the same speakers or listening emitters or audio emitters, I guess I'll say, in those tests. So super enlightening. But at the end of the day, the important part here is just question why people are telling you this stuff. Should we talk about any of this in more detail, or do we want to not open that can of worms? I'll say this. There was a little bit ago, there was somebody that was being a proponent of a certain product, and then it came
go that
out.
way.
Don't go that way?
No, I wouldn't go that way.
Okay,
I don't want to
won't
be
go
part of
way.
that again.
I won't be part of that again. Okay, we won't bring that up. I
entered
know
that
that would be
discussion.
exciting, but I don't want to go
I
down
entered that discussion in good faith. It went downhill really fast, and I'm done with it, and I just have no interest in it.
We won't go down that pathway. So sorry for opening slightly that can of worms and then shutting it again. So we won't go down that pathway. But I think it's really important that people question what you see, ask why, and then use it as a stepping stone to ask those questions and then go find more information, and then ask questions again and go find more information, and just keep doing that in a perpetual path of learning. Don't just listen to somebody and be like, that's all I need to know. I'm going to go buy and make a decision based on that.
I mean, you can pick any piece of audio equipment out there, or even video stuff. I mean, if you guys stay on the audio side, you can play with cables all day long. And I mean, are there cables that sound different than other ones? Yes. But again, in order to make things sound different, just like with power amps, they either have to be designed poorly or designed purposefully to change the sound.
Or they're Romex.
Or their Romex, which did sound slightly different
in certain situations. Yeah.
But I mean, that with cables, I mean, I don't know, when I first started putting my second or third system together in 98, maybe 98 or 99, I demoed a whole bunch of different cables, just, would take them home over the weekend and try them out and see what was different. Most of them sounded very similar to nearly identical, but there were a few that were very different. And they were really obscure, strange geometries that probably were heavily contributing to that fact. There was one that was just like a big, thick sheet of cable or of copper. I mean, it was probably 4 inches wide, just a thick foil of it that was encased in a fabric jacket. And you'd kind of lay these things out on the floor and hook them up, and they sounded different. But I mean, their electrical mechanical properties are very different too.
So Van Gool asks, if cables are better, will you hear the difference on your system? I think this is important to understand. That let's take amplifiers as an example, or AVRs, because this is something that's talked about a lot. There was actually a video that was made on this not too long ago, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this whole topic. There are differences in pieces of gear. Like if you go look at Audio Science Review, you can see Amir's chart that says way up here is the cleanest, most amazing, least amount of distortion possible with a DAC. And then way down here is the worst one. And then you got all this stuff in the middle that's going from like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, whatever, to go up to represent the best. And people have a tendency to grapple onto that. I know I did it at a certain point. Now, this isn't Amir's fault. Amir is just simply providing objective data. And he is a trained listening engineer. He's probably going to notice things in audio, listening things than most people will. But at the same time, in a lot of those situations, you're listening to the same thing on repeat, which makes it a lot easier to find maybe something that you're trying to find that's different. I mean, if I listen to the same track or look at the same thing just on repeat, it makes it a lot easier to find something that's different.
Which we need to do for future stuff.
Yeah. If you're ignorant and you just watch something once and then you never see it again, you have no idea if that was minutely different or not. That's just my point of the listening test. Anyway, back to what I was talking about with the distortion and clarity and stuff. Several years ago, I watched and looked at his stuff. And I'm like, I want the cleanest possible DAC I can get. And I bought an X-Saber Pro, which is still one of the cleanest that you could possibly get. It's got a SYNAD score of like 121. It is unbelievably clean. There are very few that actually best it. Toppings, I think, are some of the only ones that best it on the DAC front. Part of me bought that because I thought, hey, it's the cleanest. There's got to be some type of difference. But the other part of me bought it because I didn't want to have this feeling in the back of my head that said there may be something. that I'm not hearing, and I just want to subconsciously know that what I'm hearing is as it comes in is as it goes out. So there is a level that this can be important. This is not me saying this is not important to a certain extent. But the overall point that I'm trying to make is that our ears are not machines. Our ears are not an analyzer that Amir is using to measure this equipment. And again, I'm not discounting Amir. I think he does a great service for the community and the space. I'm simply saying that chasing SYNAD scores and buying equipment simply based on a distortion coefficient is not the right way to do it, because you will not hear it. This is talked about all over the place. There is objective data on this. Do not take my word for it. Go and research it on your own.
Audibility thresholds in the 80 to 90 range.
I think it's like in somewhere between 70 and 80-ish, somewhere in there. Your speakers are going to have a way more higher impact than any of the other equipment is going to be on this. Your noise floor in your room is going to have a greater impact on this than anything else is going to. You're not going to notice. So comparing something like to a Denon AVR to my X-Saber DAC, I could put them side by side, and I have done it. You're not going to be able to tell the difference. When you do tell the difference is when you introduce things like auto EQ, when you do things like not accounting for level matching, when you do things like accidentally, and we've all done this during our comparisons, leaving some setting on that was changing the sound. You're like, oh my gosh, that sounds so much different. I totally understand why everybody's saying that. And then you go back 2 hours later after coming to all these conclusions and realize there's a checkbox checked that was enabling like double bass or something stupid that you should have found when you were going through all of this. Almost every single time, and I say almost just to give myself an out, because it's 99.99999% of the time, virtually every time, when there is a difference, it is human error. There is some variable that you are not accounting for that is allowing you to hear, see, or feel a difference. I've done too many of these tests to think otherwise.
On those DACs, you can purposefully configure them with different reconstruction filters and things like that to color and change the quality of the sound. It's not that they can't be set up the same way. It's just that they're not set up the same way. And so there can be a difference, but it's a purposeful difference, a design choice or a mistake, not a major difference in the way the sound is being processed by these DACs. There's a company, a very high-end company called Bricasti Designs that I go listen to at Expo every time I'm there, and they have some very expensive electronics, and they're almost always paired with Tidal audio speakers, which is a great sounding set of speakers. They use the who makes those ceramic drivers? The Accuton ceramic drivers.
I was going to say, you talk about those all the time. How could you forget the name?
It's been a while, but they're a great speaker. I really like them a lot, and it's always a really good sounding room. They have a DAC product that has they don't always have it every year, but they have a DAC product that has multiple different types of DACs in the same box. So they have like an R2R ladder DAC, and they've got a standard a Sigma Delta DAC, and they can change back and forth between these. And and whether or not it's you perceiving a difference or looking for a difference, or there is,
there's nothing wrong with that.
It's fun to listen to.
I think a lot of that, there is a place for it. Let me rephrase what I was saying. If a component is designed to be transparent, you will not be able to tell.
Correct.
That's probably a better way to say it. If a component is designed to be transparent, it's going to be transparent. Do not go down the pathway of thinking this one's only got a SYNAD of 90 and this one's got one of 130. I'm going to be able to tell the difference.
Nope.
Now, at least in my experience, in my blind A/B testing and ABX testing, I have not been able to tell. Maybe you've got some golden ears. I got to be really careful about saying never. Maybe you got some golden ears and you're able to tell. In my experience, and everyone else's that I've taken through these tests experience, you can't tell. And I've done a lot. We did it at M-Wave. We've done it at M-Wave actually multiple times. You can't tell.
Amplifiers are very similar. Most of them are very clean reproductions of sound. Some of them purposefully color the sound to make them sound different. Some of them will have better damping factors that can control certain speakers better than others. some of them will have better power handling capability and current sourcing into low impedance loads that can handle certain types of speakers better than others. So there are amplifiers that are better suited to certain types of speakers. Martin Logan's, any of the planar magnetic speakers tend to have very low impedance drops. Certain other speakers will have very low impedance drops. But just like with cables, the better designed the speaker is, the less impact the cable and the amplifier are going to have.
To a point, I think it's important to clarify that if
better
you start
design,
listening,
meaning the flatter the impedance curve of the speaker.
Yeah. Well, but the point I was going to make is, if you start listening at higher levels and the amplifier is just not able to keep up, or
right, if it can't
gain is mismatched from the preamp to the amplifier, there are variables that can come up that you absolutely can tell. But at a moderate listening level, let's say 75 or 85 or something like that, with a speaker that is not horrifically insensitive,
you're using
a few watts or half a watt or what have you in a normal room, or even a very low noise floor room, you're not going to be able to tell. Maybe in an anechoic chamber, maybe, but even then, the distortion that a speaker is going to create, I would bet, is going to mask most of the distortion coefficients of the amplifier. Mm-hmm. But maybe I'm wrong, because I haven't listened to any of this in an anechoic chamber, so I really can't speak on that in any level of authority.
I've got an amplifier that's purposefully colored. It's a Past Labs 250.8, and they, in their design, purposefully introduce even order harmonic distortion because it sounds pleasing, to get a more tube-like sound. And it does sound good. It doesn't say, it's not accurate, but it sounds pleasing. And I bring that one up because it has a dial on the front, or one of those power meters like you get on Macintosh and all the other ones. And that amplifier, it's an AB amplifier, and it's got a decent amount of Class A bias. It is somewhere in that 12 to or 10 to 15 watts biased into Class A into 8, and so 20 to 30 watts into 4. The needle on the amplifier doesn't move until you exit Class A, because it always just burns that amount of power. And I don't think in my room I have ever seen the needle move. So I've never sent those speakers more than 20 watts of power. I mean, because a lot of the low energies get sucked off to the subs. So, I mean, you've got to be playing crazy loud to even draw that much power. Now, when I had that amplifier hooked up to the Neoliths, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, however long ago that was, yeah, the needle was moving there. But you don't use this much power. Everyone thinks they need to have these 500 watt, 1,000 watt amplifiers for their speakers, but
it depends on the situation.
For transients and for situations, yes. But for normal listening, you don't generally use this much. I mean,
for what we're calling the everyday man's normal listening. Some people's normal listening, you can push things to the limit. But let's talk. I want to bring up this real quick.
But going from a 100 watt amplifier to a 500 watt amplifier, you're gaining maybe 6 dB.
Maybe, if the speaker is even able to utilize
to utilize it.
So EHI, not sure how to say that name, says the issue is just that most people's systems aren't resolving enough to hear a difference with better caps, cables, etc. But in the rest of your system is dialed in, it gets you the last 10%. So I'm going to say that I'm pretty sure that the MadVR Experience Center is dialed in enough that you'd be able to hear this. The noise floor in that room is... I don't have a microphone that has a noise floor low enough to be able to measure that, but it is very low. It's actually kind of distractingly low when nothing's on.
With the projector off, it's super quiet.
It's super low. And the speakers that are in there are, at least the horns, are 117 dB sensitive. So if there is a speaker that's going to be able to resolve some type of minute difference, it's going to be them. They're just... distortion coefficient is very low. Their directionality is ridiculous. And the components in there are as transparent as they're pretty transparent. They're not as transparent as you get, but they're pretty transparent. And I have not been able to tell. I actually have 2 systems set up side by side that I can switch back and forth. And the only difference you can really tell is EQ.
Mhm.
That's it.
We'll bring some stuff over and try it. I mean, we can play around.
I'm open.
All right.
I will gladly admit if I can tell the difference that I was wrong. I will freely admit I have no problem
we'll make
doing
some
this.
6-second looping tracks. We'll A/B some stuff, and I think it'll be fun to try.
I'll wear like a poop hat saying that I was full of it and
Now,
all this other stuff.
There's the question of, can you hear the difference, and does it make a difference? So that's the
What do
other
you
thing,
mean?
like specifically with like cables, because that was just that showed up in that last comment there. Cables can make a difference in sound because they're a passive filter. If they're long enough and they're designed either
If they're
poorly
long
or
enough. Yeah.
if they're designed either poorly or intentionally
Sure.
enough to audibly color the sound.
Well, that was
Whether it's a
exactly what
high,
I said with the monster cable demo. You
right,
can absolutely make something happen, right?
right, and you can make something
For
happen,
sure.
but at that same point in time, that's also something you can EQ out at the end.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that though.
You wouldn't want to, but the big thing you're going to hear in cables, I mean, big thing, is if you have big impedance swings in your speakers.
See,
And even then, it's a question of how much and how long that particular run of cable is. If the cable resistance gets high enough, and the because of the length of cable, and the speaker's impedance is different enough, and the speaker
theoretically,
drops
yes.
low, you could theoretically hear a difference. Because if you get a long run of cable and your speaker cable happens to be, say, a half ohm, and your speaker at certain frequencies drops down to under 2 ohms, that's a noticeable difference in impedance. I mean, that's a 25% difference in resistivity there. And if it has hot sections where it's normally sitting at 8 or 12 ohms or 10 ohms, that impact to that cable at that specific frequency doesn't apply nearly as much.
So I think the important thing here, going back, is to retrace what I said about amplifiers and synad and all of that stuff, is that objectively speaking, when you start changing metallurgy, you start changing components and you're dealing with current and voltage and all this other stuff, absolutely different conductance and things is going to make a difference. Like there is going to be a measurable difference. Like you could probably put on a multimeter if the cable was long enough. This is theoretical because I know Amir's done this stuff and he's measured stuff and he's looked at it and been like, there's no difference. Now I have no idea what the cable lengths he's used. It's possible that he's put him in. He probably did in his reviews. But this is, I think, on the extremes of things, like what I was talking about with the monster cable demo, where if you got 200 feet of a speaker wire and you're comparing it to something that's 10 feet long, you're gonna tell if the gauge isn't
Big enough,
substantial
right? Yep.
girth.
And we did that. We did that at M-Wave. I mean, I had one comparison where I had 2 10-foot runs compared to a mismatch pair where one was a 10-foot run and one was a 50-foot run or something, because everyone's like, oh, you got to make sure your cable runs are the same length. And no one could tell the difference. There was no shift in center point. There was nothing. I mean, it sounded the same. But the speakers we were using were the Ascendo, the 10s, and they have a very well-behaved impedance curve.
But if you increase that speaker cable length to something like several
200 feet, yes, then you might be able to.
But you're not going to, I don't think you're necessarily going to notice the center point. Well, you might if the SPL changes because of current. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But the people who are going out of their way to hide massive spools of cable in the wall in big, giant, loose loops because they don't want to add too much inductance, because they want to make sure that all their runs are the same, you're just throwing money away. The difference you're going to have between a 10-foot run to one speaker and a 40-foot run to the other speaker is not going to be audible. Unless you're cheapening out and running 24 gauge wire, but then why are you spooling an extra 30 foot of 24 gauge wire?
That is true.
So, I mean, if you're using 12 gauge OFC or 14.4, you're good.
Or you're masochist like me and running 12.4.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that again. Anything else we should talk about on this topic? Oh, one last thing.
Yep.
I think it's also important for people to realize that just because you can't tell today doesn't mean you didn't used to be able to tell yesterday, like in the past, when components were not designed to the transparent levels that they are now, when they were designed to a different standard, when you had a reliance more on tube amplification and your standard of production wasn't as high and the technological ability wasn't as high. I think eventually could a difference in years past, like decades past, potentially in comparison to now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wasn't alive then, so I don't know. But I think it's important to know that what we're saying is if a component designed today is designed to be transparent, you ain't going to tell. And I think it's also important. The last thing that I want to say is don't feel like you need to spend extra. Like if you buy an AVR, right? Don't think that just because you put an amplifier on it, a dedicated amplifier, that things are somehow magically going to get better, because they're not. What's going to end up happening?
You have to need it.
You have to need it.
There's got to be a situation where you actually need it.
And what's going to happen in a lot of those situations is you're going to, if you're not accounting for variables, the gain structure is going to change. Mm-hmm. The SPL is going to increase, and you're going to perceive an increase in clarity because the SPL went up. There is a lot of talk and things that happen, and this very well could have been a thing of the past, but I have actually talked to multiple electrical engineers and guys that service this equipment and design this equipment present day, that there's been talk about how removing the need from using the amplifiers on the AVR somehow makes everything else better, and that the other things that the AVR is doing are somehow becoming better. And this can be applied to the entirety of the hobby. Just because you remove something from a piece of equipment does not necessarily mean that anything that piece of equipment was doing before is magically going to become better. How electronics are designed now is everything is segmented, and everything has protection circuits and regulators and all kinds of other things in it that prevent these things that people say that are going to happen from happening. Now, it may have happened in the past when you had things like single rail PSUs and they were all drawing from a single rail and they didn't have these transistors that were regulating voltage, and we weren't able to prevent things from overheating and blowing things up and going into protection and stuff. Sure, it may have happened, but in present day, don't chase the rabbit unless you need to chase the rabbit. Do not go down these pathways unless you have a clear reason for why you need to go down that pathway. Don't buy an amplifier unless you have a real reason to buy an amplifier. Don't buy the Denon 6800 over the 3800 because the 6800 has more wattage per channel of amplification. It ain't gonna matter because you need something like double the power in order to gain 3 dB. You're not going to notice. So anybody that is telling you, hey, you need to spend more money because this one has a larger number, they're just trying to get in your pocketbook. And I think that's the biggest thing that people need to pay attention to is ask why somebody's asking you to buy something. And is there a concrete and objective reason to why you're going to benefit from buying that thing? Is it going to help you? Or is it just going to help them if you buy that thing?
The other big one on that is expandability. A lot of people get sold on the fact that, well, this one has the capability to do this down the line when you upgrade your system.
Oh, I just had a customer, I was talking to him about that today, and they're like, oh, well, I may want to add channels down the line. Well, are you doing that tomorrow, or are you doing that 3 years from now?
Right, because in 3 years or 5 years, the new processor that'll be out will be better than the one you have now, and then there's no reason to spend the money on it.
Save the money now. Get what works now, and then either get rid of that thing, use it in a different room, sell it, and then get the more technologically advanced thing. Because if you bought a 6800 now, let's say, because you thought in 2 years you'd expand, well, HDMI 2.2 may come out, and the new gaming console that I have no idea, may come out, and it needs HDMI 2.2. Well, now you got to buy a whole new AVR, when you thought you were going to use the one you spent more money on before, but you have to buy a new one anyway. So why do that? Right.
Yeah.
So again,
the different boxes thing is an interesting one. You see it in high end audio too. Like the somehow need to have a separate box for everything, where the preamp has to have its own box, and the streamer has to be its own box, and the DAC has to be its own box, and you need an external clock for the DAC that needs to be its own box.
Then the external clock needs its own clock, and it just
or that needs its own power filter, and then it's. If you want to have the audio jewelry because that's what you're into, there's nothing wrong with that.
People like stuff.
People like stuff.
We like
stuff.
And
if you want to have that stuff because you like to show it off, or you like to say that you have it, great. But if you are buying this stuff because someone's told you that it's going to make your system sound better, then you have to ask who's telling you that stuff. Is it you're telling you that?
Why
is
are they
the
telling
person
you
who's
that?
Why are you telling it? Is most likely because they're either building the stuff or they're selling the stuff.
It's not necessary. Don't ask the who, in my opinion. Ask the why. Why are you telling me this? What benefit do you have? And there's always a benefit, in my opinion, for that person to telling you something. Question me. I want to be questioned. Ask questions. Why are you telling me this? And if I don't have a good answer, then don't listen to me. Don't listen to Bob. Don't listen to Jonathan. It's really important that you question what we say. I want you to question what we say, because I think that leads to a better understanding and a fundamental foundation for everybody trying to get places in this space and hobby. If you question what people that are telling you things say, you're going to have a better understanding of everything. And I think it's more enjoyable because you're not left in limbo just trusting people's opinions. And yes, I am focusing on AV equipment and home theater. Please don't take this out of context like some people do and be like, he's talking about government. And don't do that, because I'm talking specifically about this stuff. But I think that always happens, and it always happens from dealers. And yes, I am a dealer. I'm a custom integrator, but a lot of times it comes from, you need to buy this more expensive thing, and you need to do this, and you need to buy this. And it's like, why? What are you getting out of it? Are you getting anything beneficial to you that you're going to be able to take advantage of? Or is it all just smoke and mirrors and in an attempt to line somebody else's pocket? And this is not me saying that every dealer is bad, or they're bad people, or they're out to get you, because they're salesmen and they need to make a living. And that's how a lot of that part of the space works. But it's really important for you as a consumer to ask the why. Is this going to benefit me? And also ask the why to how much, if it is going to benefit me, is this benefit worth? That's something we haven't talked about yet. But if you fall that, the further down you fall in the rabbit hole, the more expensive those benefits become. And if you're almost at the bottom, chasing that 1% or 0.5% gets really expensive. And you've got to ask is it worth it? Or even easier, why am I doing this?
There's certain things that, yes, you could throw money at and you can obviously get a better result. Subwoofers are one of those. I mean, there's a real tangible benefit to adding more subs to a room.
You could throw money at virtually any of these things and get a technical
I don't know about
benefit.
that. I mean, what you could throw a lot of money at power amplification beyond a certain point, and you're not going to get a benefit.
Yeah, that's probably true.
You're just not going to. It's not going to happen. I mean, same thing with a lot of these audio processors. Unless you want or need the specific features that they offer, you're not going to get a tangible benefit from.
But my point with you could throw money at is that, like with an audio processor or a DAC or something, there is a technical benefit of it measuring better, but it's not going to benefit you because yes.
But I'm not even saying from an audio, from a perceived sound quality standpoint. I'm saying from a feature standpoint. If they're going to say that just one is going to has a better SYNAD score than the other one, that's not worth the money. But if there's a technical feature set on it, you need multiple independent sub outputs, or if you want to be able to create custom filters for your room, or if you need to have different layouts, or if
that's the expensive one.
If there's complex things you want to do in your room, those are the things that the higher end processors will give you that you can't get on the lower ones. It's the tinkering stuff. Like I'm playing with this Trinov right now, and I love the tinkering stuff that it can do. It's really neat. It's got so much capability, But at the end of the day, when I have the Lindorf in the system, it doesn't have any of that stuff. And I just come down, I sit down, I put on music and I enjoy it. I don't need to tinker with it. Could I make it better? Probably, because I don't like the fact that it's a black box that I can't tinker with. And once you get into deep enough into this hobby, you want to tinker with it. But I've never been disappointed with the sound that I get out of it. So do you, it's a question of what do you need and what do you want? And do you really know what it is you actually, trying to find that balance between it. That's where the money factor really falls in. Because you can get a great experience from a moderate system.
You can get a great experience from an inexpensive system. For sure. If it's properly integrated and your room is set up properly, you can get an amazing experience. Just do the room right.
Yeah. Don't think that you need to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to create this perfect theater experience. There's guys that have under $10,000 in their system.
Less than that. But
yeah. That have very nice, enjoyable systems.
Now,
especially in smaller rooms where they don't need the power output and the SPL output, you can have a great experience.
But they've put a lot of time in a lot of those cases, a lot of time into the room itself.
Yep.
That's the overlook factor in a lot of this is don't overlook your room.
The room is the most
primary component. It is the
That'll
biggest
color your sound
instrument.
more than everything else.
Yep. And then power. I'm just kidding.
You got to have the right power cables. Because if the power cable's not plugged in, the stuff doesn't turn on.
That is true. Got to have those power cables. All right, let's answer some questions.
I did that power cable test one weekend, and man, every one of them sounded worse than the one that came in the box.
I wonder how much of them actually sounded different. It was just your brain deciding, oh, this one sounds worse.
I don't know. I mean, the first time I found one that sounded better than the $3 one that came in the box, I think it was $5,000, or maybe as good as the one in the box. And I just was demoing them, but it was for fun. But
oh my God, $5,000 power cable.
Right. $5,000 power cable. And the $3 one that came in the box, I couldn't tell if it sounded better or not.
And that's saying something.
The $3 one that came in the box is a great power cable.
Questions. Mr. Music asks, hey guys, are you going to make a video of your own home theaters? It would be fun to see how they are set at your place. Last I saw was when Youthman visited your home. Eventually. I just got a lens to be able to take pictures of it. I'm not great at doing these because I don't know what people want to see. I'm kind of impatient and I have a tendency to rush through things. So I don't know that it's a great idea to have me go through it. I'm talking to some content creators about coming out and doing some stuff on the space of the Mad VR Experience Center, but nothing yet. Probably in the spring. Bob, we need to, I guess we're waiting for you to redo your room.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to come over and check it out before I take it apart, yeah. But I mean, I fell into this, like I was trying to get the basement done, and I started on this project, kind of before kids, or like right as the first kid was coming along, and I got it done when I had my oldest daughter. Those speakers were still upstairs in a bedroom, and I can remember like rocking her to sleep multiple times. She loved Bon Jovi's The Rising. Like that album. She fell asleep to that album so many nights. And I just go sit in there, kind of just hold on to her while she fell asleep. And I had a great time listening to those speakers just upstairs in the bedroom. And then I finally got the space finished down here. And the problem was, once I got the space to a point where I could use it, then I had so many other just like kid stuff and other things where I'm still staring at a pile of wood that's supposed to be a bar that I never got around to doing, just because like when I walk down there and see that, do I want to go work on the bar in my spare time, or do I want to go in the other room and listen to music or the other end of the room and listen to music for a couple hours? And that's kind of where I got stuck. And I need to get unstuck from that, and changing everything is a good way to do that.
You're moving in that direction.
Yeah. It'll get there. Hopefully hopefully this year I'll get everything done.
Oh,
That's my plan.
Brian B asks, What do you think about the stereo integrity HFS24 versus HS24? Nick says they are on par under 3,000 watts. I have no idea because
I would
haven't
love to get
experienced
one of
either
each and try them out. I have never
That'd be
had the chance
cool.
to do it. I've been looking at both those drivers actually recently, and I would love to know the difference.
But I have no idea. I don't have any
Yeah.
objective experience with either of them outside of walking in the room at M-Wave and having some subjective experiences with them. But I can't weigh in on that, Brian, unfortunately. I know that's not ideal, but anything that I say isn't going to be beneficial to you in that
We can get one of each
situation.
and put them in a box and test them.
Yeah.
I think that would actually be a lot
Stereo
of fun.
integrity, if you're listening, I'd love to test them. Austin Smith, if content is not designed to use them, do they just not get used, or is there negative? We already answered this, and it was talking about
why. Yeah, if the content is not designed to use them, they literally just don't do anything.
They don't do anything.
If you listen to Atmos music that is mixed to bed layer channels, they are never utilized. They just stay off the entire time. If the content is mixed with movable objects, they will be engaged. And if there's a stationary object that sits in the wide space, they will also be engaged. Unless your processor has some sort of weird upmixing standpoint. So you can upmix into them, but not natively.
Aaron Bless. Ryan, I think you touch on the topic of references relative, but there is a lot of conflicting discussion online of 85 at -20 or 85 at 0. Which is it? I'm not sure what you mean.
I think he means the volume knob kind of stuff. Like, do you set your volume knob to one versus the volume knob to the other one? And
does it matter?
So my problem with that, and I have an issue with the whole argument of reference, is that everything is mastered at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you pick one particular type of content where 85 dB is -20 on your dial, or 85 dB is 0 on your dial, then you now go to a different piece of content that is mastered at a slightly different level, and it is nowhere near the exact same thing. So just say you're going to put your dial to 0 doesn't mean anything.
It's good to calibrate to that point, though.
If you want to, but I mean, your system is going to sound exactly the same if your 85 dB point in your room is at 33 or -33 or at 17.
As long as you have enough output voltage.
Assuming you have enough output voltage, you're not clipping. Yeah. So that's the problem with changing these, is you could potentially wind up clipping.
My reference is at -22 for calibrated test tones. I mean, it doesn't really matter where it is. It's just
it's a number,
and it's a subjective reference point. It's a THX reference. Just because they say this is what it is doesn't mean that's what all content is going to be referenced at, what they mastered at. It is what it is. Yeah, I think theaters used to play at that volume, but then they started turning it down because it's really loud. I mean, I think my typical watching is -10 is usually where I am when I'm just doing content myself and I'm watching it myself, unless it's some action movie and I know it's got all great scenes like Top Gun or Dune or something like that that's got a phenomenal mix. Then I'll turn it up to reference. But
right, yeah, on mine, when I'm on the other processor, just because I was more familiar with those volume levels, I mean, listening to movies was usually around -20 or so. Music, I'd push up a little bit louder, Atmos music, because it's mastered or supposed to be mastered at a lower volume or at a lower level. I crept up to around 0. But then you pop into a 2-channel track by mistake, and all of a sudden it's blowing up, and you're reaching for, you're diving for the remote, trying to turn it down.
And when I say I'm going to reference, I have a measurement mic in the Mod VR Experience Center, so I can see exactly what the SPL is. So I will turn up to a specific SPL. I'm not turning up to a dB on the processor. I'm looking at the SPL that's actually going on in the room. So reference is a good starting point. It's a good point to see, hey, can my room do this? But you need to be able to measure whatever that is. Good question, though. I think the industry should get off of like, oh, everybody listens to reference, because that's not true. I'm guilty of saying that, though. Palindrome guy. Hey, guys. Happy New Year. What's the best type of TV for a light-controlled room? OLED.
OLED, yeah.
Unless you're going micro.
Plasma.
Micro. Plasma's cool, but it's 1080p. Can you imagine if they made 4K plasmas? That'd be
I would
so
love it.
cool. Oh, it'd be awesome.
I would go out and buy a new plasma TV tomorrow if I could go get one.
It'd be so good.
I still
So
watch
good.
mine.
But OLED, no going back. Maybe micro when it gets better, but
micro, and I don't know about the other quantum dot stuff because I don't have a lot of experience with them. I've looked at them briefly.
I don't see a difference.
I know some of the ones really like some of the Samsung panels and whatnot, but I've always been very happy with the picture that comes out of an OLED, and I like the wide viewing angle that they provide.
Well, I'm talking about a QD OLED, like the high-end Sony and Samsungs and stuff. I can't tell the difference unless they're directly side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can see that the QD is a little bit brighter, like a little bit brighter. But other than that, I can't tell.
But if you're in a dark room, it's going to matter your viewing distance, the size of your screen, how much light output you need, because you can overpower your eyes pretty easily if you're sitting very close to a display that's putting out 1,000 nits or more in a completely dark room, because your eyes only have so much contrast that they can handle.
Now, when we talk about 1,000 nits and 4,000 nits, I think it's important because Kevin says Samsung announced the 2025 QD OLED 4,000 nit TV today. As far as I understand, and I am not a TV guru, as far as I understand, that is not at a 100% white. That is like
probably
a 10%
window. Yeah.
So it's important to realize that in a lot of these cases, it may say 4,000, but it's important to remember that's a 10% window or whatever it is. They all measure different. I would just use SMPTE or ANSI or some. Everybody needs to use the same standard. They don't.
You can find that data on what RTDINGS.
Yeah. But I guess that was a long way for us to say we like OLEDs or plasmas if you want to do 1080p. OLED's cool though.
I used to really like LED TVs because you could get them with matte screens, and so in high bright rooms they worked, but that's not the same thing. If it's not a light controlled room, I would worry about your off axis. Well, if it's not a light controlled room, you might want to look at your off axis and your reflections.
Miguel Muniz asks thoughts on HD Fury.
I have a Vroom. I love it. I use it constantly.
If you have a use for one, they're great tools. They're not magic tools. They're tools.
It fixes most EDIT issues. You can spoof a low latency Dolby Vision. And I use the Vroom as an audio extractor because it was $1,500 or $200 or $2,000 to upgrade the HDMI board in my processor to be HDMI 2.1 compatible, or $500 for a Vroom. And I bought a Vroom. So what you can do is you can take, so like when I want a game on the projector, the Xbox puts out 4K 120, which takes is that 32 gigabit or 40 gigabit? I can't remember which one that one is. I don't remember if the Xbox does. Yeah, I can't. I think the Xbox
either 32 or 27.
I can't remember which one that one puts out. Yeah, I think it might be 30. It's more than the PlayStation 5, but it's one of those ones. But anyway, it's more than 18. Yeah. So, because I first started gaming on my Epson 5040, and the Epson 5040 only had an HDMI 1.4 port, which is 11.2 gigabit. So you couldn't even do 60 frames per second HDR. You could do 30, but you couldn't do 60, which was the big change between the 5040 and the 5050. But when I went to this, I would have to have gotten a different processor to be able to handle it, to get the audio out. With the Vroom, and I think one of their other products too, it pulls the audio stream, a bit stream, out of your HDMI signal and attaches it to a 1080 or 720p carrier signal that it sends on to your processor. So it works as a splitter, it works as an audio multiplexer, or it has a lot of different HDMI features. But the big reason I bought it was to get audio from a high bandwidth HDMI 2.1 signal into a processor that doesn't support it. And it works great for that.
Easiest way for people to understand what an HD Fury and other devices like it do is they are Swiss Army knives to fix HDMI issues that you may have in your signal chain. It's really what they're designed to do. They're not doing anything special. They can do things like low latency Dolby Vision, or
and you can change you can create custom EDIDs to change what's being pushed through. You can create different EDIDs that will or when you're using low latency Dolby Vision, you can change what the display or what the player is being told your display is capable of. So if your display would normally be broadcasting, it's capable of 1,000 nits, you can make it 100. You can change certain parts of the metadata that is out there.
It allows you to manipulate the HDMI signal.
Yep.
Good question. Palindrome guy asks, in a double-blind test, can you tell one good subwoofer from another, like REL, SVS, JVR, JTR, etc. at 20 hertz? Those that you listed, yes. But if you're comparing ones that have very similar capabilities, no.
Most likely not.
If they're both really well designed subs, no. When you start getting that low, especially 20 hertz and below, your audible signal is virtually gone. I mean, 20 hertz is on the fringes of what you're able to hear down in those lower frequencies.
And that's person dependent too, because your high frequency and your low frequency extensions are very different too for certain individuals.
Now, when we tested this at M-Wave, and we did this subwoofer comparison with 7 different subwoofers, you could tell subwoofers apart from one another based on their ability to extend into the lower frequencies. Ones that extended further, you could certainly tell.
There was also a potential issue of room modes in that one too, because they were co-located.
Yeah. But quality subs, if they're designed similarly, no, you can't tell. Now, if they're using different waveguides or different tweeter types and all that kind of stuff, yeah, you can tell. But in subwoofers, especially, I shouldn't have brought up speakers because they're easier to tell apart. But subwoofers, getting into the inaudible part of the frequency range, it gets more dicey.
You look at their distortion characteristics, you look at their output characteristics, you look at their group delay, and there's not much to them beyond that.
Yeah.
Oh, and the phase change. So it's just how well they're going to integrate. Yeah. There's a certain set of very measurable characteristics on subwoofers because the wavelengths are so long that aren't like normal speakers with their dispersion pattern.
Good question, though. Well, I will say that good subwoofers set themselves apart. So make sure that I say that. Tiki Time, Ryan, can you tell the Storm folks to correct their typo for the SP Core 16 quick guide? The overview for the XLR reads 14 balanced analog input. They had me scratching my noggin. The pick diagram is correct. I will mention this. I just took a screenshot, so I will send that to Matt right after this. We'll get that fixed. Tiki Time says, can AV dealers give suggestions to manufacturers on what the customers are asking for? Like get rid of the third row of ceiling speakers and add a second row of side surrounds?
That's a decoder spec kind of issue thing that's more Dolby than the manufacturers, I think.
Well, I think maybe he's talking about Marantz and getting rid of the 6 tops and adding like rear wides or something.
Yeah, but they'd have to have a way to decode that, and I don't know if the individual processor is capable of decoding that. I don't know on that one.
There are benefits to those things, though. I mean, if you have multiple rows and if you have rooms that can take advantage of them, like 6 tops, sure. But rear wides are not all that often used.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly at all.
Probably even less than front wides. Front wides would be a really great thing if they were implemented. If we went to a 9 base layer channel, that would be great.
Which they're talking about, if I remember right.
I brought that up last week. If they move that as a like an audio track, like a music track channel, especially for cinema, it would be amazing. But it's not there currently in the residential spec, so we get no benefit. We don't get a lot of benefit from it, and that's the tough part.
Okay. Van Gool asks, do you guys like how Dirac Live works on your speakers, or do you keep it off?
That's a bad one for me.
This is a tough question. The reason it's tough is because in a lot of people's situations, depending on their sub configuration, Dirac can actually do some limiting things with your environment. And what I mean by that is Dirac has a tendency to neuter your low frequency extension. You're a lot of times just going to fall off at somewhere around 20 hertz. And if you don't have a way around that by keeping things like your infrasonic subs out of what Dirac is doing, you're going to lose a lot of that low end extension. So, at least in my experience, I could be totally wrong, but in every time I've run Dirac, like if we've run it on the JTR 4000 captivators, the subs that we've got now, which are the Ascendo 21s, 32s, and 50, every time we did that, I lost all of the low end extension, and we had to rip out those subs and then present certain subs to Dirac and then bring the infrasonics in at a later time, or just curtain it off. I think we did that and that worked, but then we had to boost the low end quite a bit.
You weren't even using Dirac when you weren't even using Dirac when you were on the your previous theater, right?
No, because it was destroying the low end frequency.
Yeah. I have used it one time ever and at home.
But this is not limited to Dirac. I mean, this is really all auto EQ will do very similar things because of how they handle infrasonic signals. They have a tendency to neuter them. This is not just Dirac. This is a lot of them. So if you can keep things onto a mini DSP, it can be, or any type of external device. In the Storm sense, I use Zone 2 for the infrasonics. They're not presented to Dirac. For Trinov, for the optimizer and waveforming, because the infrasonics are different and we can't present them to the optimizer, we use a QSC QSys 110F in order to do bass management. And that keeps everything out and gets the extension down into below 5 hertz at ridiculous SPL volumes. So Dirac is good. It can do great things. Optimizer is good. It can do great things. Odyssey is good. It can do great things, but they can also do a lot of damage depending on how they're implemented. And this is why this is going to sound like I'm shilling. Calibrators have a place. Like good calibrators know when they're listening to it. We did this repeatedly in the Mad VR Experience Center. We would let Dirac, Optimizer go do their thing. We would pre-calibrate, use auto EQ, and then we would go back and listen. There were times you would look at something and you would measure and it would be a flat response and you would listen to it. And there were 3 of us in the room for a week and we would all listen to it. We would all look at each other and go, that does not sound right. And when situations like that happen, you need to trust your ears because there is something going on in the room that the measurement mic is not picking up. It could be a resonance. It could be a alignment. It could be just something unnatural with a filter integration or interaction. There's all kinds of different things that room EQ can do that it thinks is right that our ears are going to listen to and go, that just doesn't right. And this is why guys that do this professionally, that know what to listen for, and I know this sounds like I'm shilling, but they're going to be able to hear this because it's what they do for a living. It's what it's like if you're having somebody build your house. If you don't know how to build a house, you're not going to do it. You're going to let somebody else do it that knows what they're doing. You may be able to do a good part of it. And if you do it, great, but you're going to want to have somebody come back and check it if you don't do it time and time again. Same thing for the calibration, at least in my eyes.
Even with any of the audio cue ones, it's important to measure yourself afterwards because the graph that they give you is what it says it does is not usually
not only measure and check, but change, because there's a lot of things that you're going to need to go back in and tweak that then may not measure perfectly flat, but are going to sound a heck of a lot better.
But depending upon the auto EQ system you have, you may not be able to change it. You might have to run everything again.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And again, and be prepared to run them again and again. I ran Dirac in my room one time ever because I've never had I've only had one processor down here just to get some experience on it before M-Wave 2 years ago, I think. And I tried to run Dirac. I did it wrong. I'm not going to say that it was Dirac's fault. It was 100% user error. Well, there was a good portion of user error in there. If you follow, I don't know if it's still current, if you follow the Dirac recommended microphone placement locations where you were doing the even points around yourself. You'd create bad interactions with the filters or with the measurement positions, and it was bad. I got done, and it introduced this weird kind of phasing thing in there that was creating a sense of vertigo when I listened, like I was falling out of my chair forward when I was sitting still, and it kind of made me nauseous. And I'm pretty sure that was just because I measured things wrong. And Matt told me never to do that again. And I said, okay, but I've never had the chance to check it again. So, but then when we did it at the show with the same processor, it didn't do that. So I'm pretty sure it was just me.
User error.
Yeah. And you can mess stuff up just by not measuring right or having stuff set up wrong. So it's important to check your results, because we can
really important.
We can all make really easy mistakes and think that there's some big problem with the equipment just because we made a mistake.
And sometimes there is big problems, and you need to find
and then other times there are big problems with the equipment.
Yeah. And you got to find kludges and overcome shortcomings and stuff like that. That's especially when you're trying to get on the bleeding edge. There's absolutely things that you're going to run into that are going to be limitations.
Yeah. Non-standard configurations and configurations that push the boundaries beyond what most people have, which is what they're designed for. You're going to be taxing the systems.
Yep. Good question. Tito Rodriguez asks, so does this also apply to processors, Storm, Chernoff, HTB1, or does based on features and processing channels? So I think he's talking about our conversation with Synad and audio quality and different things like that. Yeah, it applies to everything. It's not just one specific part of the space.
I had the Lindorf, I had the Storm, and I had what was the Marantz thing that we had? Maybe it was a Denon that we were using pre-outs on.
The 8805 or AV10? AV10 or the A1H?
Maybe it was the AV10. It was the one we had not this year, but the year before in the room the room comparison room.
That was probably an 8805.
No, it wasn't 8805, but it had pre-outs. It had XLR pre-outs. No, wait, maybe it didn't.
I think it was an A1.
Anyway, I had all three of those down here, with the same speaker distances set into them, and all the processing turned off. They sounded exactly the same. Now, you
had that experience at M-Wave 23 where you had people with the Marantz specifically, and I'm using this as an example to people thinking that they hear a difference. And
the DAC filter,
back to priming, they had the DAC filter turned on, or you said you were going to be turning it on and off, and people were going to be able to hear a difference, or you wanted them to raise their hand if they could hear a difference. Not that
it was all Jonathan's fault. Jonathan wanted to test the DAC filter on it. I think we tested it at his house a couple times. It was either before or after. I don't remember how that one panned out, but we wanted to test the DAC filter feature on that because there was one that they allowed you to turn a different DAC filter on in that Marantz product to use the one that was their kind of signature sound versus the clean sound. And I was switching it. Basically had everyone, listen to content, hands up, and just say, put your hand down when the filter changes. And when it changes again, put your hand back up. And I changed it for every 10, 15 seconds for probably a good 2 or 3 minutes. And no one did anything. And then I got up and walked back to talk to someone who came and asked me a question.
And nobody could see Bob, by the way.
Right, because I was in the back of the room.
Changes.
So I'm back there as I'm talking to someone else. Then the hands start going up and down.
One person raised their hand. And that, we think, inspired confidence. And then another one. And then another one.
Because one person now thought they could hear the change. So someone else thought they could hear the change.
This is actually something, I'm going back again, that Mr. Toole talks about. That you can actually play into follow the leader. And you see one person raise their hand. And you're like, oh, well, maybe they hear something that I don't. And I don't want to be wrong. So I'm going to raise my hand too. And you run into this situation of group mentality or mob mentality where one person does it, then another one, and then everybody feels like, well, there's got to be a difference so that I can do it. And then you start running into this psychological effect. And now everybody's just doing it. And at the end of the day, Bob had been back there talking and everybody's raising and putting their hand down. He's like, I haven't been doing anything for like 5 minutes. And you guys are raising your hand. Oh, the human mind. Such a beautiful and stupid thing.
Yeah. When we did this last M wave, I had 2 analog switches. I got high purity copper switches. I ran oxygen free copper for all internal wiring. It was the most transparent, physical switches only way to set this up. They were attached directly to the back of the speaker. And so we could hook the cables and things up to them. We tested XLR cables. We tested our speaker cables. And then we did some streaming comparison. But the way we switched it, I did center off switches so that there was always a pause. You couldn't say that like, hey, it went off, and now that the sound has changed, it must be going to the other one because it wasn't an A/B switch. It had to center off. And so we did sometimes A to A, A to A, A to A, then A to B to see whether or not there was a statistically significant difference in whether or not people could detect the change. And it made people extremely uncertain about the changes because it didn't just go from one to the other and now it must be different because it changed. You never knew if you were going back to the same one you started on or the other one.
ABX.
Right.
It's so
and helped out a
important.
lot. And what it came down to is most people couldn't tell the difference between most things.
Yep.
Out of everything we had that weekend, the only things that people could tell a difference between, and it was only a few individuals, was between Romex and not Romex. And they couldn't tell the difference with any other speaker cables once we got out of Romex. And then streaming bitrate, because they're mastered differently, they have different amounts of dynamic compression. But once the listeners were educated as to what to listen to between a compressed low bitrate stream and a high bitrate stream, they could every time pick out the difference. They could always pick out the difference. They just didn't know which one was high and which one was low.
Mm-hmm.
But that's extreme differences in bitrate. We're talking like Redbook versus it was either 320 or the step below it. I had to go pretty far in steps to be able to make an audible difference. But between like 1644 and 22 or 2496, no one could tell the difference.
I guess cassette tape probably has a pretty high bit rate. Anyway, we have one more question, I think. Austin Smith. I listen to music with my SPL average at 83 to 85. A great mixed CD I listen to at 92 to 93 dB. At that volume, I typically don't listen to more than one album. So 50 minutes, that seems plenty loud. I think maybe this wasn't a question. But on volume, I think it just depends on what you're doing. I get pretty loud. I've always been pretty loud.
You can remove listening fatigue too, depending upon your the DSP you put or the EQ you put on it too.
Well, not only EQ, I think I'll use this time to talk about the last thing I guess we can talk about is a lot of people have a tendency to misconstrue loudness when it's actually distortion. Mm-hmm. And they think, oh, I don't like things being too loud. And what is actually happening is I don't like distortion. And the best example, the recent example that I have of this is I had a couple come through my room a couple weeks ago, actually, the day of the opening that we did, that opening event right before Thanksgiving. I had a couple come through, and this couple was looking at doing some speakers and doing some stuff. And the woman, his partner, his wife, made it abundantly clear that she did not like how loudly he listened. She thought it was too loud. And I told her that I would start low. I said, okay, let's start at a certain volume, and I'm just going to keep turning it up. And I want you to tell me, I'm not going to tell you when I turn it up, but I want you to tell me when you think it's too loud. We got, by the end of the demo, so we had 6 tracks. By the time I got through Imagine Dragons Radioactive, I was above reference. And she never told me to turn it down. And so what that tells me and what that was indicating was that It wasn't that it was too loud, too much distortion. And that's what happens in a lot of these situations is people overdrive components, mainly their speakers, into compression, and they're misconstruing, though it is loud, they're misconstruing what they think is, I don't like this because it's loud, but they really just don't like it because they're running into distortion. I mean, if you go to a concert, for some reason, I see people online saying that concerts are 100 dB. I'm like, no, music concerts are not 100 dB. Well, I'm talking like rock concerts and like out at Sandstone, or like you're going to listen to some pop star.
You go stand in the front row at an indoor venue.
You're at like 130, really like absurd volumes.
Not that loud, but yeah, I always wear earplugs.
It's pretty loud.
But again, it depends upon the frequency also as far as comfortability. There's a video I watched. I can't remember who it was, but it was this talking about this live recording engineer or live concert engineer, and the way that he mixed content. And he had this crazy, way unbalanced EQ thing where, I mean, he would take basically it was 80 or 100 hertz or something like that and cut it out, just -40 on it. Because that's like there was some resonance in a drum kit or something that hit there. And then he'd put a big cut from like 1.5K to like 3K, because that's the where all the mid-range energy is. And he put a couple other cuts that were just like ugly frequencies in there, and he'd pull them all the way out. And then just everything else would be playing crazy loud. But those are the frequencies that your ear is most attuned to. That's where the vocal range are. And you get this big sensation of loudness without being painful and uncomfortable to listen to. So when we listen to music way too loud at Ryan's, I mean, that SPL meter would be up there and it's bumping 130 plus sometimes. But if you look at the frequency ranges that those are all usually sub 100 hertz. And
most of them are way down there, like 30
or the 60. A lot of them sit at that. A lot of the acoustical energy sits at that kick drum, 53 hertz or whatever, somewhere in that range. A ton of it sits there, and that's where a lot of that energy sits. But the rest of the track is down 95 or lower.
Mm-hmm.
And so while it's loud, it's not painful to listen to.
Well, and I do want to say that 130 is peak C. It's not like a weighted C. It's not a slow C, or
it's not continuous output. That's how loud that big hit is that you
that
feel.
Peak is. So, yeah. Good questions. I don't think I missed anything. Somebody was asked, what's direct art? So this last question we'll go through. This won't take very long. Direct art, active room treatment. It uses up to 150 hertz, and every speaker is able to support every other speaker, if you configure it to do so in the theater, to remove room modes and support it for SPL or anything else that it's trying to do to get an overall better fidelic experience from the audio. It can be a little tricky to set up.
It also is meant to increase or to address decay time issues.
Yes. Yeah.
Through basically backwave cancellation kind of stuff.
Instead of using passive treatment, it allows your speakers to do what treatments would do. Which
is what ART stands for, is active room treatment.
Yeah. What do you know? It is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
It is super
cool. But you can
cool.
hear it. It's different. So if you go into a room that has ART, well, for example, in the Mad VR Experience Center, because there is one setup that uses ART and one that doesn't, if you are sitting next to a side speaker and not in the main listening position with ART on versus ART off, you can hear a difference from the side speaker.
If you know what to listen to.
If you know what to listen to. And if you've experienced the rooms enough, you can hear the supporting speaker doing its thing when you're not where you should be. And that's by like standing on the other side of the couch, not in a normal listening position. You're standing off to the side. You can hear things. You can hear that supporting wave, not in a bad way, but if you know to look for it, you can hear it.
All right, last one. I'm not taking any more for real. Tito Rodriguez says, 21-inch PA drivers and sealed enclosure able to get infrasonics, you're better to go with Ultima 18s. They're not going to be able to do that. That's not what those 21s are designed to do.
They will play down to kind of about the same level.
They'll play, but you're not going to get...
No, the issue is you have to heavily EQ the 21s. So the 21s and those, like a high excursion 18, or even some of the high, not the high excursion 21s or 24s, but I think a high excursion 18 and a...
but he's talking specifically about PA drivers.
Like, yeah, it's like a 21-inch Pro Audio versus a high excursion 18. They're going to hit about the same, I think, at 10 and 20 hertz. I'd have to go look at them again, but their output at that level will be very similar. The difference there is that when you're at 60 hertz, one will be 120 or 110, the other one will be 140. You have to have a way to EQ out the Pro Audio, or you have to massively EQ the Pro Audio driver in those boxes. So if you don't have that, it's not going to give you a flat response, and it will need a lot of EQ.
You should look at database, Tito.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could see them on there.
Look at database and compare the frequency responses and maximum output before they encounter compression, and that'll give you a pretty good indication of what the drivers are capable of doing. In my experience, where you want a 21 playing and where it's really, really good is in like 20 hertz plus.
53 hertz for the kick drum.
You get those into mid bass and they just dominate. Mm-hmm. There's nothing comparable to them.
They're fast. They have giant magnets on them, and they have endless headroom.
And they don't have to move because they're a lot more surface area than something like an 18. So they're able to play and then stop super fast, and the decay times they're just nice. I won't say decay times because that's not the right word, but they're able to play and then not pretty quick. So I like them. I don't think there's any other questions. 10 hertz. Yeah, I don't think they're playing down to 10 hertz in a 21. That ain't what they're doing.
They're going to hit, 89 dB before they start to hit some reasonable compression distortion. If you give them a lot more power, I think you can get them into the low to mid 90s at around 10 hertz. You're not going to hit crazy output. Look in database for...
I'm looking now. So if we do, is there a BNC 21?
You can look at the iPal, but that's a dual opposed seal.
No, I'm looking at the DS 115-4. And let's put that up against... is there an Ultimax on here?
Yes, you got to look at DIY. Systems.
Dayton Ultimax. I got it. So I'm not going to share this, but let me see where their compression is.
Yeah, so you can look at the Eminence versus the Ultimax, and so at
93.
So at 10 hertz at long-term sweep, where they're not massively compressing.
Yeah, you're right. They're about the same.
88 dB on the Ultimax, where it's not crazy out, and the Eminence with about similar voltage, 88. They're basically the exact same at 10 hertz. But that goes up substantially in output as you raise frequency. The Pro Audio 21s have massive headroom.
Yeah,
but like I said, you've got to have a way to EQ those 21s if you're going to use them, because you either have to boost the low end heavily, or you've got to massively cut the mid range, and you also have to have some sort of way to soft clip or dynamically limit the low end as you push that speaker louder, because you will overdrive the low end trying to keep up with the high end.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a complex, if you have a Q-Sys that can limit that dynamically based on frequency and output, then you can do something like that with them and get very good results. But you're going to have to set them up right.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Okay. That's all I got. So we got to watch Riddick for next weekend. We're going to do Saturday because I'm out of town on Friday.
Okay.
I got to go do a speaker setup in Phoenix. So we'll do Saturday. We got to watch Riddick. There's no other animation, so I'm not going to make myself suffer watching another Dark Fury. What should our topic be? Any idea? Chat, what do you think? What should our topic be?
I don't see anything. So I'll have to think about that.
I'll have to come up with something. Jonathan will probably have one, like how not to use a table saw or something like that.
When CES? Is that coming up real soon?
I try not to think about it because it's just going to ruin my life with HDMI 2.2. I don't know when CES is. I know I've got ISE coming up in a month, which I'm not overtly excited about because it's a lot of work. But Chad, if you have any suggestions on topics, put them in the comments on YouTube and we'll see if that happened for the next video. But before we go, Bob, you got anything before we let these guys go on this awesome Saturday night?
Other than for those people in the Midwest, avoid the roads tomorrow.
Oh man.
And yeah, have a safe couple days there.
All right, hold on.
I think it's supposed to snow all tomorrow.
Herc Dryer says 100 nits versus 300 nit projectors. If you get 300 nits on a solid projector, there is no going back.
It's hard to unwatch.
It's not going to happen. Ryan has been to the demo in the Mad VR Experience Center. I think he'll agree.
It's really hard to unwatch.
Once you see it, there's no going back. And once you see it, there's no unseeing. So, but it's got to be a quality presentation, because if you do it with absolutely atrocious native contrast or anti-contrast, it's not going to be a good experience. But if you do it well, it's hobby ruining.
Mm-hmm.
So, meant for the topic. Yes. I don't think that's long enough for a topic, because that's a given. That's just HDR.
Or maybe ways to get there, or to.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
We can look at that.
Game reinforcement for the screens and stuff.
There's only a couple good options. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Bob will talk about that. Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Much appreciated. Hope you have a good time. Hope you enjoyed your holiday. Kids are going back to school next week. That's all I got. Thanks for sticking with us for an hour and a half. It's always good to have your questions. If you guys have any questions that come up when we are not streaming, I found out that I could do this. You can scan this little QR code that I just put up, and you can send a message. That'll take you to the website, and then you can just go down to the contact section at the bottom of the website. If you have any questions, need anything, happy to help. I know we talked about dealers and asking, why is he telling me this? Well, I'm telling you this because I want you to have a good experience and not be ruined by some other dealer like I have. Let me get you taken care of and make sure that your wants and desires are looked at instead of me selling you what I think is most beneficial to me. So that's all I got. If you guys have any questions about anything, let us know in the comments. You can tell us how much we don't know. I'm always appreciative of being told I'm wrong, because it's a learning experience for me.
That's a great topic too, Tito.
What?
How to get your room right and where and how to place acoustic panels. And that's a whole massive.
Oh, you're going to get different answers on all those different things.
Yep.
Everybody's going to tell you different things. So anyway, have a good one, guys. We'll see you next Saturday. Stay safe out there. See you guys.